Up enough to where it wasn't.
Thank you, Phil.
Yes, ma'am. I don't even know what you're thanking me for, but I'm much appreciative. Oh.
Jersey movie, 127 hours.
Full article. This article.
I haven't read it. People keep saying something. I started to read it and the guy.
Miss Heather, we ready? Good morning. Today's Monday, June 3rd, 2019. It is 9:01 a.m. We're in the city chambers. I call the City Commission special meeting to order. Those present here are Commissioner Luke, Vice Mayor McDowell, myself, Mayor Hanks, Commissioner Carasone, Commissioner Emmerich. We have City Manager Lear down there, City Attorney Slayton, Deputy Clerk Ms. Taylor, and we have Recording Secretary Reed. And then there in the back we have our Chief of Police, Todd Garrison. Apparently, Fire Chief's playing a little bit of hooky today. It's all right. It's all right. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. First, please turn off all your cell phones to vibrate. Turn them off or silent. Yes. Sorry, I have a cheat.
It looks different, doesn't it? Something's different about it.
Yeah, I've gotten used to. All right. And if you want to speak, you got to fill out a public comment card right over here. All right. Can I get an approval? Or no, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I get an approval of the agenda, please?
So moved. I'll second that.
Got a motion on the floor by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Commissioner Luke. Let's take a vote.
There it is.
Oh, hey.
That passes unanimously. Do we have any public comment, Vice Mayor? All right. We're going to move on to presentations. Our presentations have a time limit of 15 minutes. We're going to start with our Sarasota Manatee MPO priority process. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to introduce our Assistant Public Works Director, Monica Bramble, and she will discuss this item first.
Good morning. In January, Commission requested that we have a presentation on the Sarasota Manatee Metropolitan Planning Organization Projects Priorities Process. So I would like to introduce Ryan Brown, the MPO staff, with the Multimodal Transportation Planner to give you an overview of that process.
Thank you.
Great. If you all have the presentation in front of you. There we go. Thank you. For the record, once again, Ryan Brown, MPO staff. Been a transportation planner there for about 2 years now. I've been down here before, but there's some new faces, so I wanted to come back and provide a PowerPoint that not only covers kind of what we do organizationally and how our processes work internally, but also projects priorities specifically in the calendar that you have in front of you. Lee and I worked during the last week to set up our call for project schedule for 2020 way in advance so that we can provide as much clear direction hopefully as possible into our process and get you guys the opportunity to review all projects going forward prior to them coming to the MPO. So I'll just get started. Just really broad, we work with majority of our roads that we work with are regional, are large regional and interregional roads, including 75, 41, 301, all types of those roads, as well as we do work with jurisdictions for local projects and including lab projects, and we help coordinate with those as well. We've kind of came into existence in 1977. 11 jurisdictions, 2 transit agencies, the airport as well as Port Manatee. We're all responsible for planning for all those entities. We help guide basically on a very general level state and federal funds into local jurisdictions. That's our purpose. That's why the MPO was created. We're here to work with you and all of our jurisdictions to help to make sure that your priorities are heard and seen by the Department of Transportation and as well as using our funding that we have available, roughly around $10 million a year, to guide that money onto projects in our region. As you said, my title was generated off of multimodality, meaning that we want to plan for all types of travelers, not just auto, but including transit and bike and pedestrian. There's a huge emphasis on creating a large-scale trail system throughout the state, and the MPO is tasked with moving that forward too. In 2012 and 2015, their MPO is now required to basically, it changed the way that projects were submitted, and the projects that were considered for funding kind of changed. We're required now to report on specific targets set by the federal government. We have to set those targets biannually, and basically they want to see that our projects are accomplishing the goals that the federal government wants to see, including, increasing mobility as well as safety and all types of, and also project delivery, all things that the federal government wants to see when their funding's being used, essentially. Basically, we translated the DOT's goals, and the state translated those, and then we created our own group of measures of basically how we land on how we score projects now. This all kind of ties into how we land on project priorities specifically. This is kind of all the background information on how we kind of present the information to your staff, and then they present it to you in terms of which projects you want to see move forward. Generally, these are all things that we're responsible for. It ranges from anything from public health all the way to job creation, things that the federal government as well as the state want to see us use their funding to promote, essentially. This is kind of our overall organizational chart. We kind of answered all of these groups. I mean, we have three committees as well as widespread public outreach. The governing board, our governing board, kind of guides this, and then we're responsible for answering any of those questions that come forward. These are just kind of a brief outline I kind of touched on. We have a bike ped committee. They're responsible for helping plan any bike trail, public health, public use kind of related things. We also have our CAC. They are representative of every jurisdiction. Their special interests, as well as, we want to make sure that, we're including minorities, the elderly, handicapped, all have a say in how we're planning transportation, because sometimes that can be overlooked in terms of we're just planning for cars for one type of user, and we want to make sure that that's not the case. And lastly, our technical advisory committee, made up of your staff, as well as other jurisdictions throughout our region, that provide technical input on all of our plans, as well as provide guidance on which projects should be looked at and evaluated. Our governing board, they set the big picture and they provide the framework. They review all of our plans and programs, and kind of have the final say on what moves forward, what projects are in our transportation improvement program, which I'll touch on here in a second, but basically help guide us into the future. Our staff, including myself, we're responsible for doing all these things, so providing documents, coordination, feedback, as well as managing the planning process between so many different types of entities that it's kind of acting as a liaison is very important. That's why I want to be here today, to help answer any questions you may have. So we always have to put this in there, sunshine law. We have a lot of public officials, and we always have to meet in a public entity, in a publicly held meeting, to make sure that we're very transparent and clear about what we're trying to do. Our plans, specifically, and these are kind of ones that really we want to draw on here, as our long-range plan and the TIP. The UPWP is our budget. We have a PPP, which is the public participation plan, which outlines our public involvement. But really, the LRTP guides the long-term projects and goals for the region, and the TIP is our annual installment of that, which basically looks at every year which projects we are developing, from feasibility all the way through construction and project delivery. For the LRTP, details kind of a 25-year time frame. We're in the process right now of developing our new LRTP. That should be completed in October of 2020. It's updated every 5 years, and it's that opportunity for all of you to have your say on which projects that you'd want to see that you think will help best build out your network and your grid, and essentially help us also identify funding sources and the amount of money that might be tied up in these types of projects, because many times, or, Venice Bypass, for example, it's last year of funding this year. It's been in the program for 20 years since it's been kind of installed into the feasibility study process. So these are long-term projects. That project's nearly $90 million since it's been started. Just an example of how long these processes take to actually develop projects from beginning to end. Our project priorities, that's kind of why I'm here. Really, they're applications that we receive. The MPO doesn't create any or generate any projects on our own. We entirely take project applications from counties, other jurisdictions, as well as transit providers. We review them based on the project criteria that I spoke on a little bit earlier about. That's federally mandated. We kind of adapted our process into evaluating the projects that way, and then basically create a list based on the type of funding that's available and generate that list, and it's voted on by our board. That's then moved to DOT. DOT evaluates it and tells us what they have available in their work program. That's kind of the very broad process of how it works. But our goal is to make sure that you'll have a great understanding of the projects that are going forward prior to them being moved to the state for consideration. The tip, that is done after the project priorities. Basically, that is us formalizing the projects and the funding that DOT has provided to us. It's adopted every year, and then the state creates the STIP, which is the statewide tip, but basically voted on by the governor, and that's the funding allocation for all transportation funds in the state. The PVP, not really need to touch on that, but basically it's our tool to make sure that we're involving the public in everything we do. All of these must thus work together really for our system to make sure that what you want to see is what the rest of the region will help benefit all together. All of these things work together. We just did a large local comprehensive plan seminar that we had back in April, and really wanted to take a look at all of that. I thank you guys for being there and presenting. Thank you to Jerry for that. We really want to make sure what we're creating in our new long-range transportation plan is indicative of what you all want to see, as well as the projects that are actually being built out of these plans. This is kind of where we are right in the middle. The local project priorities basically is what guides us to creating the MPO documents. It's your opportunity to tell us which projects you'd want to have funded, and then us to evaluate and for DOT to look at going further. This is kind of an example of what our work program looks like when we first get the tentative from the state. It basically breaks it out in the type of funding, whether it's project development all the way through construction. Kind of tells you where a project begins and ends, the general location, and the type of improvement. Also has a 5-year schedule for the money in every single year. It changes from time to time. It's actually changing quite a bit. Project increases as well as just moving of funds to make sure that we have everything balanced. The state has to keep us updated on that as well. This kind of just a general idea of showing where we get our funding from. The state almost entirely pulls their funding for projects from fuel taxes as well as DMV motor registration. It's about 80% of that. That's something we have to look forward to going forward. Fuel taxes are not a long-term solution to, we know that project increases. We haven't had a fuel tax increase in 30 years. So with project increases, there's definitely a deficit there. We're finding it more difficult to fund projects, especially large-scale projects.
Sir, we have about 4 minutes.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank you.
I'll just speed through to the end then. Basically, all this is just how we're funded. If you have any really specific questions about any of that, I'll be happy to answer any of those. As you go through, these are kind of just a general outline of how projects flow from PD&E to design to right-of-way to construction. As I said, projects take 15 or more years to complete, especially large-scale projects that we're typically responsible for planning for. So I just kind of moved through these. Really what I wanted to get at was towards the end, what I've provided at your place is kind of a schedule of how we've developed this process. DOT's kind of changed their process in terms of when they want to see projects submitted. It used to be in June, now it's into March. Every year it's around March 15th. So that's kind of forced us to move ourselves way earlier into the year. So as you can see, our town tours, which is we do with every jurisdiction, we come around and sit down with staff and say, okay, for this year, what are your projects? What have you heard from your commissioners basically what do you want to submit funding for? We get an idea, as well as this year will be even more important as we're developing our LRTP and our long-range plan. Kind of what are the big ideas that you have? You know, we know about the interchanges, we know about Price Boulevard, we know about, you know, wanting to build out the bike ped network as well. They're all things that we want to hear from you and, you know, get more specific direction on as we go forward every year. So in August, we're going to be doing those tours. The LRTP scenarios workshop, which basically guides our whole process, will be in October. This year, instead of November or December, we're moving our call for projects earlier, so it gives you more time to look at these. So come October, that's about when you guys would have the idea of staff will be able to discuss with you about all your projects. And we won't be asking for a completed submittal until in December. So it gives you some time to look at all that. We'll take them in January to our board and committees to evaluate and to determine if they're worth adopting. And then middle of March, this probably the first year we'll actually submit on time to DOT, because it's been difficult the last couple of years to get it all done, especially with all of our jurisdictions having, we know, the constraints of getting things onto agendas, and we're aware of that. So we're trying to make it more, more feasible for every jurisdiction to be able to evaluate their projects with staff in time for us to actually submit them to DOT in March. So with that, my information. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Luke?
I like this last thing, the signs. They're
Yeah.
kind of clever in your presentation. I was noticing them. Thank you. I am learning since being on this board a lot about a lot of things. So bear with me as I try to grasp a little bit more about MPO. Who established the MPO? I mean, who is it established under? or
So
by?
the MPO is technically, we're a regional agency. It's interlocally agreed between all the jurisdictions, and it's federally funded. So it's kind of an interesting entity. They're federally mandated in the 70s. And now it's a statute, federal statute, that every metropolitan area has to have an MPO that manages state and federal funds.
And then
basically.
they kind of sit under DOT, do
Yeah,
they?
we're basically we're a liaison for DOT, because DOT doesn't really interact with state funding wise. That's basically our job, to help guide DOT into what our jurisdictions want to be built. That's really the kind of the flow. The feds give, apportionments to the state then liaisons that to us, and then we work with the jurisdictions to make sure. Basically, so there's multiple steps along the way to make sure that the hope is that things don't get lost between the state and local, where things change along the way. Our job is to make sure that they kind of follow their course wherever the funding may go, that we're making sure that the projects that are going to be built are actually indicative of what you all want to see actually on the ground.
So DOT cannot do a project without you guys?
They can through LAP, but we're also involved in that process. The LAP project process is a local process that, these are for smaller scale projects. A lot of those you'll see like sidewalks or intersections and stuff like that. But any large, capacity adding regionally road project would have to go through the MPO.
Okay. You made the statement that your plans go to DOT.
Yeah, they have to review everything too.
Can they refuse your plan?
Technically, yes. If we don't meet the stat, they provide guidebooks for everything we do. Almost
Right.
to the T. From our budget to the tip to the project parties, they all have to follow certain criteria. You can adapt them however you like, whatever works best for your area and your jurisdictions. You can adapt, but they have to check all the boxes in the guidebook laid out by statute, basically. Everything that we do is basically defined in statute. So if we meet those requirements, then no, they really can't refuse it, but we have to meet all of those requirements, either state or federal.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
You mentioned the gas tax also, that it hadn't changed in several years.
Decades, yeah.
Who's over that? Who's the oversight?
state.
The state
State.
decides whether to raise
To
it or
raise the
not?
gas tax or not, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And would you flip back to page number 6 of your presentation, please?
You have to give me a heads up. I don't have my numbers on these slides, so.
Oh,
Yeah.
because I was waiting for you to find it to read. what I
Number
was gonna
6.
ask.
I'll go back to the very beginning and then I'll count.
Okay, whoa, go back. One more. It's the, yes.
This one.
Yes. I see the federal DOT, the Florida DOT, and then you guys.
Mhm.
Looks like you guys are a hybrid, but tend to follow more of what the federal does. And the state's just kind of basic, it looks like. Is that,
Our
Clear.
goal is to be more, basically, we are a federal government, our salaries are paid by the federal government. You know, our budget's federally, adopted, so is our $10 million in funding is federal funds. The state kind of took a more simplistic approach in terms of it. We wanted to be more all-encompassing, like environment can mean a lot of things. What we like to look at is quality of life, so livability is more under environment. The state kind of just took a very broad stroke at it. The state has different requirements, so most of our legislation, like MAP 21 and the FAST Act, are federal requirements. So we're kind of adapting both at the same time to make sure that we're aligned with the state, but also really we do have to answer all of our performance measures go back to federal statute. So we want to make sure that in all of our plans and everything that we do, we're actually meeting those requirements, because we're not sure yet. There's really been no penalty to this point to not meeting your targets, but we're not sure going forward if there will be some kind of, adjustment if you're not meeting your targets or you're not doing things to actually adjust them or work on meeting your targets. So we want to make sure that we have the processes in line to make sure that we're doing everything we can in order to meet those federal requirements.
thank you very much. That's the last of my questions, but I appreciate it. I have far more understanding than previous. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
Commissioner Carrasone?
Yes, when we had the long-range transportation plan data report presented to us, there were a few things that kind of caught my eye. First and foremost was that there was portions of it broken down by county, Sarasota and Manatee, but there was a lot of municipal information that was missing. So, for instance, the population projections, the economic projections, all those are missing from all municipalities. It is merely broken down in Sarasota and Manatee. Furthermore, none of our future land use plans are a part of it. It's just simply blank. So.
I can kind of answer that.
Okay.
That was generally just, we wanted to get that out as soon as we could following, in the actual long-range transportation plan, all of that will actually be flushed out, just like it was in the 2040 long-range transportation plan. That was kind of just a review of current conditions, I would say, and what the consultant was paid and tasked to do at the time. I would say in our actual long-range transportation plan, yeah, that was just the program for that specific program. That's not going to be the final product.
That's not going to be the final
No, the long-range transportation itself will be much more
in-depth.
inclusive.
Okay.
Our last one was 350 pages.
Right.
So I would not say that's not going to be the end product in terms of everything, in terms of trends, in terms of your land use patterns and any of that. Basically, it's got a long way to go.
Well, I appreciate that, because there are a lot of
Year and a half.
projects on here that the city feel are priorities that were never even mentioned, not even a part of this presentation. So it was a little concerning to hear a lot about Sarasota and Manatee, but yet the municipalities weren't even considered.
Yeah, I just don't think it was. I don't think it was fully dug that deep, and I think it was just trying to build, I think, the foundation for it. I don't think the intention was to avoid the municipalities. It's just, I don't think this consultants hadn't developed it that far yet.
Well, also the consultants may not understand that municipalities work in
Yes.
unison, versus together as part of.
Yeah.
Because I have noticed over the years that Sarasota does not enter our data anymore as part of its large-scale information. It used to.
Yeah.
But now, for some reason, Sarasota looks at it, the county looks at itself in this silo, and then the city in a silo, and so on and so forth, which, whatever works, but
Yeah.
my point is that don't expect the county to enter our stuff into it and think it's
No,
going to be
no,
an
I-
overall view.
I don't think that was the goal
Okay.
either. I think that was kind of the whole goal of the comprehensive plan when we held at USF was
Right.
to make sure we had every jurisdiction have the chance to come up and talk, but also for us to hear what we need to do in order to actually develop out the long-range plan in the way that supports all of our municipalities' goals. That's
One
our-
more question.
Sure.
I believe it was the year before, maybe it was last year, when we talked about some of the things that the state and feds are looking at as priorities. The first year, it was ways to get business to and from. Second year was safety. What is our priorities this year? What do you see the state as saying, these are the things that we would rather fund, you know?
I would still stress safety.
Safety versus the economic to and from?
In terms of the way that the state has been perceived, the state's safety track record in the past 5 years or so has not been good. Consistently, by population, the highest fatality and serious injury rate by any state in the country. So I don't think we'll see that change. I think the state will continue to push safety as its main goal. But also, I know personally that LK, our District 1 secretary, he's also created a planning studio and within FDOT's District 1 that is emphasizing coordination between land use and transportation. I know that's his personal kind of the goal for this region in terms of connecting what's out there in the built environment with the transportation system better. I know that's a secondary goal. The state's overall goal, I would still say, would be safety, just in terms of trying to create projects that are, whether they're either capacity-based or actually safety-based. I mean, every project, the goal now is to have safety components built in.
Okay, so are bike lanes still like this major?
There's a debate on what bikers want. You know, that's always the trend of what's the thing
The
that we need to be building. Is it buffered? Is it separated? Is it on shoulder? Or is it on a multi-use path? There's always a debate on how that's done, but the overall sentiment is, I think, making those areas wider or separated of some kind, adding more lighting, building into intersections, taking away a lot of free flow movements. I know down here we have a lot of, in our region, just a lot of those, those yield to right hands, where there's little pedestrian islands in the middle, where you don't really have to stop to make a right hand turn. There's just those yield signs. I know right there on Stickney Point in Sarasota, they're removing those yield to right, where you can just kind of roll through the light now. They're making you actually stop and wait, because a lot of those designs from the 80s are panning out to be the reason why there's so many fatalities, especially at intersections. That's where you'll see so many pedestrian-related and bicyclist-related, basically where all the conflict points are. That's where a lot of those
without
deaths,
lights,
deaths
right.
happen. So I think that will still be, you'll still see that be
I
their
just
number
know
one
that
goal.
when we go to Tallahassee or if we go to DC, there's certain ways that we can couch it, say price, for example, to make it meet their priorities. And I'm just trying to get a grasp
Absolutely.
on what is
I
their
would-
priorities
I would
this
absolutely
year.
say you could tailor any project to be a safety-related
safety
project.
related,
If you do it
okay.
the right way. That's how I would frame it.
All right, and finally, I just want to say thank you, because the last 2 years, I feel like the long-range plan has been this last-minute thought that we've been under the gun as a municipality to hurry up, get your stuff together, and it's got to be presented like next week. And I am very thankful that you all are taking a more organized approach with proper planning in place, and we appreciate that.
I think that's the goal, that we want to be able to make sure that we can come here and we can have these conversations beforehand and not have to, rush our plans to the end, because that doesn't do us any favors either. And anything we can do to make our lives easier as well, in terms of understanding what people want to see done, that makes our job easier.
Well, you're
as well.
definitely making our life easier, so.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
That's it?
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Mayor McDowell.
Thank you for the presentation. Learned a lot. I'm wondering, how do you, if you have two equal projects in the same municipality, how does one project get more weight to move through the process versus a second project? How is that determined?
I would say there's a lot of things that go into that. A lot of it including, in any project, the project development of that project will lend itself to tell you a lot of things, and whether or not one can be, really the jurisdictions will still rank them. We ask for, in our process, we still want you to rank all of your projects, because DOT will still come back and say, what was the city's rank order? They'll come back to you after they do the project development and environmental study and say, well, the right-of-way on this project's gonna be 100 million versus this project being 5 million, because the city owns a lot of the right-of-way. There's a lot of examples along the way that, environmental impacts will tell you if that project's worthwhile or not. There's a lot of things along the way, but they'll still base, if you wanna go forward, say River Road had tons of negative impacts and mitigation issues and spend another $200 million to build it. If you still wanted to do it, the state would still work with you. It would take a lot longer, but they would still honor your rank, and that's kind of why we have project priorities lists, is that they do base their work program on that. However, I would have to say there are steps along the way. Right-of-way is a massive undertaking now. Right-of-way almost outpaces construction cost in certain urban areas. So there's considerations for every project, but I would still say whatever your rank is, and our rank, kind of as we take all of the lists and kind of build our project priority list, that would still kind of be the, DOT still relies on that as which projects they should move forward with, basically.
So I saw on your sheet, I don't know what page it is, but it's towards the end, the Yorkshire Raintree interchange.
Yep.
I thought that was already narrowed down to be the Yorkshire interchange.
Well, there was discussion, I think, that it's really looks back, the state will look at their requirements basically on how far apart interchanges have to be placed along 75. We can basically tell them in this area what's the best option for an interchange. They'll be able to read the traffic patterns. They do that when they develop the model. They'll tell us. I mean, it's 100 and probably last 4 we've had are between 80 and 150 $million to build an interchange or redo an interchange.
How much?
80 to 150 million. 210 million, I think, for the one in Ellington, because that includes rebuilding a bridge. So, I mean, it's a massive undertaking. They'll do their due diligence. They'll do their research. That's a fully federalized project and would take a decade or more to build. So yes, Yorkshire was the discussed one. I will say that would be the first option. I would say when we take it to them, we'd like to see it at Yorkshire, but they'll tell us whether or not the traffic patterns allow that, whether or not that will serve the best use. The state basically controls the SIS facilities, the strategic intermodal system facilities. We really have no say where DOT wants to put those, because it is along I-75. We can guide them and say, this is what our jurisdictions want to see. This is possible? We would prefer it there. But they will do all the legwork basically on whether or not that'll be possible.
Do you know when, by chance, that decision would become finalized? Because as a city, we have to plan Yorkshire Boulevard and Raintree Boulevard expansion to accommodate that interchange. So we have a responsibility to plan the local streets while the federal government plans the interchange. So when does that get finalized?
As soon as they think there's funding possible. It's really, I mean, that's the reality, is that right now in our region, every single interchange is basically being overhauled in the next 5 years. So really that decision would come as soon as they think it's plausible to make that happen. That money, almost of the entire state budget, the SIS facility is about 60% of the budget. So it's a large portion of it. That's a discussion we will continually have with the state. Those are things that we bring up every couple months. Those interchange projects, large-scale, multi-use capacity projects, are things that we are in constant contact with the state. We want to know as soon as possible. That's the short answer. As soon as they would provide that information for us, we'll provide it. That's the goal.
So if they make a decision, and I'm making my own plug, I think we've all agreed that Yorkshire was the preferred location. Are you saying it's about 10 to 15 years from when it's approved to actual construction?
It all depends. I will say that. If you look at University Parkway, the diversion diamond, that was a state plug, that was an external, decision outside of the MPO process. It was, basically they went up to the legislature and got the funding allocated. It's always possible that, that it changes. The process is, yes, I would say probably 10 years beyond when it's programmed for project development, essentially. So, yeah, it's a long-term thing, and that's a great example of something that we want to have in our long-range plan. I will say in our project priorities right now, it still is listed. It's listed as Yorkshire, as the interchange option. I just left it there as in the presentation because it's not clear yet.
finalized.
It's not finalized yet. We've put it in our process as Yorkshire right now. So that's where it stands.
Thank you. Is there anything the city can do to help advocate more for the Yorkshire?
Yeah,
location?
when we have meetings with DOT, that's our goal, is still to push what our jurisdictions want to see. We will continue to go back, and that's really our job, and our purpose is to be liaisons and allow them to know the information that we're hearing from the locals.
I know that we made it one of our MPO priorities for Yorkshire, but is there anything more that we as a city can do to help you, to help us, to get the point across for DOT in the state?
Letters of support always work. We've used those in the past to LK. He's been very helpful. Secretary of District 1, he's been a great liaison for us as well, and he really does. He works and hears us out. He's been very helpful with River Road and other large-scale projects. He's been helpful with DeSoto Bridge. So I don't think there's nothing that could hurt that could come out of that. Setting a letter of support to building it at that location he would certainly accept that, and he would take that into consideration, definitely.
Thank you. Appreciated the presentation.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Commissioner Pearson?
Yeah, just one other thing to kind of jump off of what Commissioner McDowell was talking about. There's a finite amount of money in a bucket, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so if we were to turn around and say our priority is Yorkshire now, they would take the money away from the other priorities in order for that to become, like,
No, because that money is.
how do I explain it?
That money is solely for interstate, basically CIS facilities.
It's a different bucket.
It's a completely different.
Okay.
It's a completely different direction. Yep.
All right, I wanted to find out if that was the truth. Okay, so there is an interchange bucket per se.
Yes.
Is that bucket shared statewide? Is that what the
Yes.
problem is?
Yes. It's not even just district wide. That's almost all of the interstate system, as well as within the CIS facility bucket are ports, so airports, seaports,
Oh,
and
ports
other.
too.
And State
Okay.
Road 70 east of 75 is a CIS facility because it's a large scale regional, connects the state across the center. It's basically that money is for regional roads. I don't know the statute off the top, but it's basically over 50 miles, I think, of. It's very loosely what I remember, but it's like 50 miles of regional connectivity or statewide connectivity. Basically, it relies on large-scale interstates and large regional roads.
So when the governor added the money just recently to the connectors within the state of Florida, will that help us with this interchange?
It should. The reality is, the thing about when governors,
It's usually a project,
they
specific
usually have
project,
something
right.
in mind.
Yeah.
It's very rarely do they do that without
Right.
prior intention. He wants to see large scale parkways built still in other parts of the state. We have no
I-4
opinion on that,
corridor
but
kinda, yeah.
that's a lot of typically what that happens. I would say though, you can see the commitment along all of the interchanges, along the widening of 75, the discussions of managed lanes. I don't think that money is ever going to dry up or go away. It's definitely, it will continue to move. Let's say that.
Is that the same pot of money that we've used to try all these years? Because I believe it's like 20 years we've been trying to widen River Road. Is it the same pot of money or it's different?
No longer, because River Road was a local road until
Correct.
very, very recently. Local road meaning it's not eligible for state funding. Which
Okay.
then, the reason it's been so
Different
long on
grants.
our list is because we have such a small amount of money. I would say a lot of our money for large-scale projects, you know, it's been Venice Bypass, it's been other projects that take up
yeah.
a large amount of our money. And same thing like this year, just to give you an idea of 15th Street East, we got our next allocation, our last right-of-way purchase, which took all $10 million of our allocation to finish the right-of-way for 15th Street East. So you can imagine how long of a process that is at every year. I mean, we have things within our process, you know, we can set aside $1 million to do, you know, ATMS projects or congestion or trails related. It's kind of set up in our RTP that way, but a large percent of that money goes to regional roadway projects. So the reason Sarasota County, you know, went forward and changed with the state, because they didn't see our money becoming available anytime soon in the time frame that they wanted to see River Road widen, basically. And then the state took that on as a state road. Now they're using their money and other funds to basically leverage that and moved it into a current year. I think next year is when construction
And we're
starts.
pretty much, I mean, the city of Northport, even the city of Venice, are pretty much fighting with the large-scale counties in order to get into that bucket of money that the MPO itself has, right?
Generally, yes. I mean, that's kind of our process tries to do. I mean, and recently we've updated our scoring and stuff as well to basically, our ranking process is not biased to anything, let's say that, but, you know, it is historically prior to when we kind of implemented these newer rules that, yeah, large scale projects typically ate up a lot more of the money. Just because, A, the MPO is a regional entity. The thought is that they do build large regional roads. That's kind of the process. But we've also looked in the more recent years is we can do a lot more with our money in terms of building projects that not just add lanes.
Yeah.
We can do a lot more. You can help redesign intersections, build bike lanes, stuff like that.
Because in the
Also,
past,
with our
it
funding.
really wasn't based off of MPO's data points or score sheets. It was more about what was fair. You know, at least a municipality would have one or two projects on that long-range, plan. And it was about fairness that everyone kind of
And
got
I
a
think
piece of
that'll
the
still
pie.
be, I think that'll still be the priority when we're developing the long-range plan now. I do think, I mean, that's always something that we have to address, even in our governing board, the same way, is that we're always trying to address equity in terms of everyone getting their share of what's out there, including our money, and then also doing everything we can to draw as many of the state resources here as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Just to follow up, so since you're planning to have the long-range transportation plan completed by 2020, I assume that that plan is going to be submitted to the state and to the federal government?
Yes.
Okay.
The federal government requires them to be done in a 5-year cycle. We did ours in like 2013 of like the middle of the year, so we have like 6 months. So basically, we have to be done by November of 2020. So what we're trying to adopt in October.
So, and I'm going back to that Yorkshire interchange. If it's in the plan as Yorkshire/Raintree, is that how it's going to be presented in the plan? Or
No,
is it?
when we can say in our plan Yorkshire, you know, that's more there for an illustrative purpose, meaning like
Okay.
in the presentation in terms of just they will decide. We can go and tell them ourselves that's where we want it in our plan. That's what we've done for a lot of our roads. I mean, we've said, you know, for our cost feasible plan, which is what we're what I'm starting to work on now is the cost feasible plan, basically going and looking into all the projects that we have in the pipeline, trying to evaluate, working with DOT to evaluate how much money those projects are going to eat up into the future, and then develop a cost feasible plan that will include projects like that interchange to determine what is feasible in the 25-year time horizon, basically. And we can submit it as, it's in our project priorities right now, is a full new interchange on 75 in Yorkshire. So it's unlikely we would change that.
When would you like the letter of supports to be sent?
Anytime
Is there
you
a
want.
specific time that's better than others?
I would say when they're in session.
When they're in session, so
Yeah.
that's like, I heard, when the state's in session?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so
Because
that's
then-
early this year, that's in January, I heard.
Yeah, So that would make sense, about January and early in that year, and then we won't adopt until October of next year.
But they're starting committee talks in October,
They are,
so-
yeah, I would say in the fall and spring. Basically the summer, none of them are really there. It just makes it easier for LK to, when he gets letters of support, he can, when they're in session, he has more direct lines of contact with them over transportation issues. Yep.
So, Mayor, do we need to give direction now to city manager so that way then we don't forget about it? So that way then we can have that letter of support sent to them? And that way then he has time to prepare it, and maybe even seek the county's support, maybe even Charlotte County's support?
Sure, I'm okay with that.
I think we need to have a conversation about all of it, so that we have that whole bunch of priorities, not only for the letter of support, but also for
Yeah,
submission
and
to the the long-range planning. So then at that time, once that's all gathered and we have our large information, these are what our priorities are, then we can send, excuse me, a letter of support that'll mirror that. Because you want it to mirror what it is that's gonna be placed in that LRTPR.
Mayor? While I appreciate that, I was just focusing on the Yorkshire/Raintree interchange, and I understand we still have to do all of the rest of it. That's why I thought we were having a workshop, so we could do it all at one time. But I was focusing more on, we're focusing and wanting Yorkshire over Raintree, and then in addition to our list of priorities.
But doesn't that have to be sorted out by the engineers and determined by FDOT to see if that even meets the criteria?
It does, but you can also have your own, I mean, it's really, you're just prioritizing it. Like I said, we really have, I don't want to say no control, but I mean, it'll be their decision. I mean, it's just like the funding cycles for rebuilding all these interchanges. We didn't really have a lot of input on that. They basically look at the life of the interchange and then also the amount of traffic that's impacting it every day. So basically, that's how they're doing it anyways. They're doing their own process. But basically, you can go and say, like right now in our priority list that's adopted and submitted to the state, the interchange is at Yorkshire. And we know that's the preference. I basically just put that there because they just haven't decided in that area where it's going to be. But I know this group, this body, as well as voted on by our governing board, that it was adopted as our priority at
Right.
Yorkshire.
Right,
So,
because Raintree is actually too close to Kings Highway in order to be approved.
and basically, that was where the discussion came back up, because in very recent terms, they kind of eliminated those requirements.
Really?
So there was, that's why there's some I think that's why they, Charlotte County brought that issue back up. I think that's why it was restated again, because those requirements have changed. Historically, it was like 3 miles in a non-urban center. You have to have, that's the kind of the separation. Those have changed. So I think that's where that issue kind of came back up. But from our perspective, it's still Yorkshire.
Yorkshire.
Yeah.
But I guess what you're saying is if a wheel is to get greased, it's gonna be the squeaky one. Doesn't hurt to be squeaky, right?
And part of the reason why I'm focusing on that is because our Charlotte County is really advocating
Pushing
for Raintree. And if we don't start getting our ducks in a row and we're asleep at the wheel, we're going to pay dearly for that decision. And that's why I was looking for direction to support the Yorkshire
Yep.
and ask the county to send in a letter of support for Yorkshire, or the chamber to send in a letter of support for Yorkshire, and just start being that squeaky wheel and advocating for I know Raintree is also in our county, in our city, but Yorkshire is the preferred for our local plans.
And I think there's been no change. We've never had it in any of our documents at any other location than Yorkshire. So that's all.
True, because it's part of our comprehensive plan for the last 20 years.
Exactly, and it was last year it was a new priority and it was entered as Yorkshire.
Right.
So from our perspective, from the state and what the federal government's seen,
It's
for
Yorkshire.
our position has always been at Yorkshire.
But it doesn't hurt to send those letters.
doesn't hurt.
And that's kind of why I wanted to be there, so you would be aware
Okay.
of that discussion of where, we've heard from the state that
Sure. Commissioner Emmett, you all right with that? Commissioner Luke?
I was gonna comment
Yeah, okay,
to that. I don't care if it's the staff that reminds, the letters, or whether it's our MPO representatives. Bring it up at that point in time. They go to the meetings regularly, so whoever brings it up, I think, is fine with me.
Okay, so we have a unanimous consensus.
So just to be clear on the consensus, it's for the city to send a letter of support to the MPO and elected officials for Yorkshire, and request the county and the chamber, Northport Chamber, to also send letters of support.
Sure.
I mean, we can't make them do that, but we can ask them
Absolutely.
for in the fall.
That's the way
We want to send those to our legislators to
Yeah,
make
our elected
those-
officials, yeah, that's why I said the elected officials and the MPO.
And I will add, the Sarasota County was in support
Yes,
last year
absolutely.
of interchange at Yorkshire.
They were very supportive, yeah.
They changed their mind, because
When
they
was
first
this?
went with Ring.
Oh, yeah.
Originally, yeah.
Yeah,
did originally.
that ended real quick.
Yes, so,
Yeah.
so that was the way I understood the consensus.
Yes.
City clerk, that's good?
The city manager looks like he's,
City manager?
I just want some clarification, 'cause it depends who signs the letter. When you send it to Sarasota County, is that to the commission or to the county administrator?
I would say all.
And we can do both, I just need to know,
Yeah,
the
I
reason I'm asking is, once to the administrator gets signed by me, once to the elected officials gets signed by the mayor. So I wanna make sure I have the right signature block.
Yeah, I would say send to everybody.
Why is that? Why do you have to have two different signatures for two different type, I mean,
Because by the ethics of my profession, I'm not supposed to send to their elected officials, you are.
okay, why can't we send to the city manager or county administrator? We've
It's
done it
preferred,
before.
Again, same reason.
We have to go through him. Got scolded over it.
I know I did too.
Well, I'd like to see that in the state statute, actually, because I'm fairly certain that doesn't exist.
You're right, it's not in the state statute,
Yeah.
but in order for me to behave ethically, I kinda have to follow those. So whether it's a statute or not, I'm still gonna follow my ethical guidelines
Where are these ethical guidelines?
in the city managers association.
Oh, this is an association guideline, it's not really a law, it's not really,
No, it's just what guide,
Yeah.
guides my profession, so.
so it's really not a litigious issue, it's what,
No, it just means that I won't be able to be a city manager. So, because if I'm unethical, then I get kicked out of the
Let's-
profession. It's funny how ethics are not necessarily
Just
always
let
the
him
law.
do it right.
let's keep everybody out of trouble.
Who cares who signs it?
it's not right.
Thank you. So everything is clear. So we want to
If
send
it's
it to
ethical,
everyone
it's right.
that needs to see it. Wonderful. Well, I have nothing else, sir. Thank you very much for your
Thank you very
presentation.
much.
Thank you.
It's fantastic and wonderful.
Appreciate it.
And you have a safe trip back.
Thank you.
So before we finish, when are we going to have a discussion on our MPO priorities to get them to them for their long-range planning?
So I will add, we added in there from October to December is basically,
Okay.
in there is
Good
when
time
that
frame.
discussion can happen, because in January is when we'll be looking to take them to our committees and board.
There you go.
Yeah, I saved it up.
I just want, that calendar wasn't in what I had, so.
Oh, okay, yeah, and there should be
Copy
other
it.
copies of it too. Jerry has one if you want one.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay.
The manager direction to do that, or is
To
this
do what?
assumed automatically
To do
in
what?
between October and December for the MPO, for a workshop?
City manager, do you need a direction?
I don't, we'll create one.
That sounds good, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. Discussion of possible action regarding Community Hall of Fame and historic timeline in City Hall. City manager?
Thank you, Mayor. During the strategic planning back in 2018, we had conversations about creating this workshop. Staff has done significant research. I'll call Josh Taylor up here because he's the one who kind of spearheaded all this research on the ideas of a Hall of Fame and a historical timeline in City Hall. So that'll turn it over to Josh.
Good morning. Josh Taylor, Communications Manager / PIO. So hopefully you've seen the memo. We've done some research on some other Hall of Fames that are out there, so there's some examples that are in the backup material. And then we know that coming up in your budget workshops, there's going to be some conversation about a reworking of the first floor of City Hall. So it's a good time to start thinking about these things as that could possibly be implemented into that reworking of the first floor. And then So that's the big one, is where to put it, how to pay for it, and then we could probably work on what it should look like. And then you have this this conversation came up a year or so ago. At that time, we did not have the historical board in existence. Now we do. So there's a good possibility or opportunity for you to give that to the historical board to come back with some folks who could be in the Hall of Fame and work on that timeline as far as the highlights of the city throughout the years. Obviously, we're in our 60th year anniversary. It's a good time to maybe review some of those things. So it's really up for your discussion.
How about even combining the timeline with
Yep.
important persons? At certain timelines, that's when these important people have stepped up. You could incorporate that within the timeline of historical. Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, that, great point about the whole historical and cultural board, because that's the brunt of my questions. Have they been consulted? What were their ideas and suggestions? So I'm not sure who the liaison is to that board, but I would really like to see them get going on that, because we need the information from them and their ideas and suggestions for budgeting. So I'm not sure who is the liaison, city manager.
I believe it's Allison in our planning and zoning division, but we can have her do that. If what we're looking for from the commission is, do you want them to have that first? Because they're your advisory board. So direction was to bring this to a workshop. We're following that. We are making the recommendation that, if you guys are agreeable to that, then we'll take it to them.
Personally, I'm leaning more towards a joint commission / historical cultural advisory board meeting to discuss this, because that way then they don't really know what we're looking for, and then we can have a dialogue and really get to the crux of the desires, as opposed to, hey, what do you think? Oh, I'm not sure. Why didn't they, this back and forth. I'm more leaning towards a joint workshop with them, but that's my
If that's
preference.
the desire of the
think-
commission as a whole, then that's what we can do. We're looking for your direction on that, which way you want us to go.
I think for me, I would not be opposed to a joint meeting, but I would like to hear what their input would be first to see whether or not it even blends with us. If it doesn't, then we can say, let's sit down together, because we're just not connecting. But we might just connect just fine and not realize it, Commissioner Carasone?
Well, I'm not real sure who's on the board at this point, because I know we've had some people shifting on and off, and my concern is that some of them may not have the historical background to actually be able to put enough input into the history part of it.
Jones on it.
Who? Joan is? Okay, well, then I'm fine. That was my concern, is that maybe the board would be more skewed towards like early Indian historical side versus, the city development side. So I guess I'm okay either way, honestly. I would like to see both the timeline and the individuals kind of mesh together versus having one over the other. I just, it's just too much when you have the whole line of half-dead people on the wall, and you know what I'm saying? You should have something a little bit better. I'm
Are you talking about
that
zombies?
right there.
Half-deads?
Huh?
Did you say zombies?
Yeah, same thing.
Half-dead.
Some of them were. But my point is that, maybe mesh the two together somehow, some way that it would not, and you're talking a lot of history. I don't know how you can even determine what's important, what's not. That's gonna be the most difficult portion of it.
Well, and I think that's where that board comes in handy.
Yeah.
And then they come back to us and then we say, there's some stuff I think we're missing. Let's sit down and go over some of that.
Yeah, and maybe we need to have a community workshop, like a city hall, a town hall, where some folks that have been here for centuries, that grew up here, could actually participate. Because we have a lot of people that grew up here, that live here, that wouldn't even know that we have a historical board. You
Commissioner
have
McDowell?
something to add to that one?
Yeah, I just,
So I was going by the list.
I was going by the list.
Okay. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can skin this cat. I love the idea of getting the community involved and doing a town hall. And you talked about the wall of all the dead people. I think maybe too, what we could do is instead of, there was a whole wall in Miss Becky's office, and they all had the pictures. Well, okay, but I think their names being memorialized on a plaque would just be sufficient. And then when you're like maybe 20 years since you've been a commissioner, your picture gets removed and your name gets put up on the plaque. And then, and then that way, then it's a rotation, because pretty soon we're gonna be.
You're not gonna have space.
We're not gonna have space. And I think a plaque for the first 40 years of all of the commissioners and the dates they served, similar to the bricks out front, but this is a plaque. And then the pictures for the last 20 years, because these people are still in the community, involved in the community, known in the community, and then after that 20-year mark, then they go onto the plaque.
Or
And,
maybe when they pass away, they go onto the plaque.
well, then
because
you're
that would be
constantly
half
gonna
of
be
them.
redoing that plaque, if you're gonna do it in the order that they served.
Well, I don't plan on going anywhere, so.
You gotta watch those buses. You gotta watch those buses.
Yeah.
But as far as, I really think that the way to go is have a community town hall, get some ideas and suggestions, kind of like a charrette, and then have a sit-down with the historical advisory board based on what the community is looking for. I think, and maybe just have the advisory board start talking about it so that they can be prepared for a joint meeting.
So,
Would you want the historical board to put on the charrette?
yeah,
I think so.
Can I speak to this,
Yes,
please?
please.
I'm
Go ahead.
waiting
Commissioner
patiently. The
Second, you.
board is our representation of the community, and they are already putting in motion for the recorded history. They're going out to the community.
Oh.
Joan and Skip and all of these guys who have that background are already reaching out to the community. So I don't think you need a really big charrette powwow for people to come forward. I say the representatives who serve this commission on that board have the ability to do so. If they feel they need more input, then
They
they
can
state
request
so.
it, yeah.
Exactly, they request that. I don't think we have to force
Agree with
them to have a meeting for the whole community, because that's my opinion. Thank you.
thank you, Commissioner, because
Yeah,
I
I
did
think
not
that
know
is-
that.
Yeah.
She
Yeah,
sets
knowing that,
meetings,
that
she
really-
sets meetings with citizens, goes out with a recorder. Some of them are really poor health, and she's trying to gain the records that they have. Marshall Groves,
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
his stuff. So they're reaching out to these people who are fading away, within the history. So I foresee them being able to do the same thing
And I'm
with
glad that
this.
they're doing that, because I see that as
Important.
that should be a part of
Yes.
some of these advisory boards' positions, is getting out to the community, whether it's economic or, that should be what they should be doing. Commissioner Emmerich.
Yeah, she had brought up Marshall Grove, that he has a great book and a timeline out there on what happened throughout all this history. But after Buddy Hughes had passed away, we were over there cleaning out her garage, and we have got boxes upon boxes upon boxes of newspaper articles that we would love to give to, to research and go through there, because there is a timeline in there. And I am looking towards the historical timeline of the city, if it's going to be in City Hall, what has happened from day one throughout the 60 years. But I would also like to incorporate the history of the land in a little short, this is where we started, this is where we are. So a little mixture of both is what I would like to see.
Like some timeline with a little time lapse.
Correct. This is our history. This is what took place, thousands of years ago.
Now zip 1,000 years forward.
Then we hit that button and here we are.
And here we
you
are.
know. But that's the way I'd like to see it, but I have the confidence in the historical board, and I'd like to have them go out and do their due diligence and then come back and let's sit down and talk about it. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. City Clerk, you had something?
Yes, the historic board actually is submitting a request to commission to be able to go out as a board and do those interviews. So I don't know if you want to give them the go-ahead now, since it's
Oh,
pretty much
yeah,
what you've done.
yeah, since it's what we've talked about, can I go ahead and get a consensus that I can do that? Yes, so it's unanimous
Absolutely.
that we encourage that, and I encourage that to all the advisory boards that would work in. Okay, Commissioner Carrison?
Yeah, I was just gonna support, the idea of now learning what it is that the advisory board is intending to do. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I agree with what Commissioner Hanks had originally stated, and that was to have the board put together their presentation, bring it before us, and then if we need to have a joint meeting, then so be it. I think that's great. Great
Commissioner
job.
McDowell?
Yeah, as long as, it sounds like time is of the essence, because it's a birthday, we have budget coming up. As long as the city manager understands our intent, that way then he's not, well, we have to put it on the agenda and get an approval. He already knows we are willing to do
Cut
a
out some
joint
of that
meeting with them.
middleman
We're giving him that authorization now, should he need it. I think is important.
I agree with that. Commissioner, are you good to allow the city manager to work on our
I
behalf?
appreciate that last part, because typically, as you know, if the boards request something, I send it to
Exactly.
you all because they're your boards.
Yeah, but I appreciate you being able to work on our behalf.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so that was unanimous, City Clerk. Commissioner Luke?
I like the first picture in the display. One of the reasons that, I like what the county does too, this
What the county
decade
does.
type thing. But this is really cool because you could put your historical people on the part that comes out, and then the historical event toward the
timeline's
back,
kind of
exactly
behind it.
through the timeline. That way your historical people that, you have chosen to highlight can stand out, kind of differentiate.
Kind of have two
But it
in
would be
one.
blending the two in one.
Are you
yes.
saying put them within the timeline, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
but the important
I thought
person,
I'd
what
said
she's
that.
saying is kind of
Same
towards the
thing.
front as a plaque with a little history on them, but then behind them fills the timeline
Correct.
of the city, but they're just kind of placed around the area where they would belong.
Correct. And I would not, the historical people, there's something they've done in the timeline or they wouldn't be historical. That's why they have the value. So putting them at that place is good, but I wouldn't recommend having, just like I don't recommend having this business of the year, this person of the year either. I think it's something that the board would do when something historical goes on. Picking and choosing who the winner is once a year, I think is a slippery slope for the city. I think it just needs to be based upon historical data.
Well, that's why in the past, just FYI, it was the chamber that did the business person of the year and all of that.
They'll do
Yeah,
so.
and it
Not the
wasn't us.
city, leave it to them.
Yeah.
I agree.
But there was,
Vice Mayor?
there was talk of the city doing a business of the year, person of the year kind of thing, and I would much rather stay out of that. That's not our role. If you go to one of the pictures, I'm not sure which one, first, second, the second wall of fame kind of thing, I think with the amount of prior commissioners that we've had, this wall of fame with all of their pictures is just overkill. If you go to the next slide, there's like a little plaque. That's what kind of prompted me to think of everybody from day one to 40 years later be on a plaque. And then the plaque gets updated every, 5 or 10 years with the new names, and that way then the pictures are there for the newer people and the plaque is there for the older people. That way then it's not the overkill of this wall of Commissioner Carasone's dead people wall.
Well, don't forget, you have one.
But that may not, I don't know how far back that goes, but we had another wall in Becky's old office that was just this wall of people that nobody knows who they are. There were only a very few that we may have. Why are you laughing?
It just sounded so bad.
Well,
Nobody knows who they
I
are.
knew all of them. That's pretty sad. That's pretty
So-
sad.
I think, you know,
I
if-
know we'll have a
if you
bigger
look- yeah.
conversation.
But my mind is you combine the first one that you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
with page 12, because 12 is kind of more of the timeline, and you put those two, and you kind of blend that style together.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is the one I'm talking about, on page 12.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, and then combining that page 3, you know, and then that way they kind of offset, but then you're combining both of them.
Personally, I would like to see the historical timeline on first floor. I would like to see the commission on this floor, because it's where the chamber is.
Oh, well, yeah, I was just talking about the important. Yeah.
I'm just throw that up.
Okay, I have nothing else. We all good? So we have direction about the advisory board. And I guess that's what we'll wait on.
Sure.
Okay. So I have no public comment. Commissioners, do you have any communication? Commissioner Luke? Start with you.
No.
Okay, Commissioner McDowell?
And I'm wondering if city manager could please give us an update when the tree ordinance is going to be seen for a workshop?
I don't know if Frank Miles knows the date that that's scheduled on the rolling agenda. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
Um,
Can you send a memo, please, and let us know?
Yeah, please. Unless, do you know the date?
Top of his head.
I believe it was just stated.
July.
Yeah, July.
So next
yes.
month.
Thank you.
Also, now that GovQA is gone live, back in July of 2017, the commission requested a commission presentation at a meeting about how GovQA works. I sent an email to Miss Katie. She's going to be working on a date. I just want to make sure that we get that sooner than later, and for that presentation on GovQA. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's it. Not much happened since Thursday, or Tuesday, or whatever was our last meeting.
I'm good. Commissioner Carrasone?
No, I'm good.
Commissioner Emmerich?
No, sir.
All right, administrative.
I just have one thing. At the last meeting on Tuesday night, Commissioner Carasone asked for a meeting with Frank Miles regarding West Villages and an update on how we stand from where it was originally done to where we are now. In speaking with Frank and everything, he thought it might be a good idea. I mean, not that you can't have the meeting, but to have an item brought from the commission, kind of like a workshop item of, not everybody was here when that started, where we are, where we're going, considering how big of a project it is to our community as a whole. So we just want to know if you guys, we would like to bring that forward to you all, and preferably in like a workshop setting, more relaxed, more openness to conversation.
Like a historical timeline, this is what was supposed to happen. That's
These are the
gonna take
intents
some
of the
time,
past, and
right?
here's where we are now.
Where we are, where we think
Love
we're
it.
going. So
It's good,
Yeah.
that, we'll get that scheduled.
Seems like you have a unanimous consensus. as I
because it
heard
only
that.
take me 10 minutes to figure, but I think it's a good
And our
idea.
concern is, like I say, nothing, I mean, you're welcome to meet with his staff, but then you're gonna have information, and I believe that considering the size of this, district and the impact it's gonna have on our city as a whole, it's something probably everybody should be educated
True.
on.
I mean, I already have the information because I was here. I have the historical knowledge, but I think that's a great point. I think everybody should have that knowledge. I think it's a really good idea.
Vice Mayor?
Great point, because when Commissioner Carasone had mentioned she wanted to have it, I was like, I wonder what they're gonna talk about that I might benefit to know about and learn about. So I appreciate you saying that. It also will be very good, because our community is growing, that this information would be available for all to hear. Early when we were elected, we held a town hall meeting over at the Morgan Center, focusing on the West Villages. And there was discussion that we would do a town hall focus on the West Villages like once a year. Or every 6 months. We made a point to say we need to do this a little bit more often than when things just get to be a bubbling and a brewing. When do you think the next one's going to be, City Manager?
We'll look for a date for a good one of those. I can tell you that staff has gone out there multiple times since then to try to do similar things. Obviously, it's not with the elected body, but we've had multiple meetings. I think there was just one in the last few weeks that we had multiple departments up there providing presentations to different areas in the West Villages. So we'll get you a
I
date.
just know that.
We can schedule a town hall meeting, and hopefully it will be a little less aggressive than the last one.
With aggressive.
And it might need to be a little bit more able to be heard, because the acoustics was horrible. So, maybe we can find a location. Obviously, City Hall is available. They know where City Hall is. They come here regularly for their West Villages Improvement District meetings. So, I think it would be okay to have it here, but that's up to you to figure out.
Performing arts theater would be a good location too. Acoustics are excellent in that building.
A lot more.
If
accommodating.
I may,
Yes.
on this subject, I think that the reason why we had so many attend was because we had
Yeah.
it there.
Exactly.
And so I think that it would be best if we found a way to work within having a town hall in West Villages versus sending it to City Hall or SCTI or somewhere else. That's just my opinion, of course.
Vice Mayor?
We have that conference room over at the Suncoast Technical we can always use too. It's right off the interstate. So there's a few options for you to look at.
City manager, anything else? All right, city attorney?
No.
City clerk? Meeting adjourned. That get you, city
That is
attorney?
amazing.
Still?